thousands of people fled. Some of them were killed, and they fled on foot for like 2-3 days to get to the border of Uganda. And then the UN already knew they were coming. I think the UN probably had intelligence that there was going to be this attack. The villagers knew, the townspeople knew the attack was coming because they could see the buildup. They told me, I had these amazing interviews with people. They basically had, the community organizers said, okay, if you start hearing shooting, go, just go. Just run. And that's literally what they did. And what's really amazing was the faith of these people. Some of these people I interviewed, they've been refugees 3 times in their life. That was what the title of the story was, 3 times a refugee.
On today's episode of Among the People, Father Joe Veneroso and Megan Fleming sit down with Maryknoll Magazine editor-in-chief and award-winning author Lynn Monahan. In this episode, you'll be inspired by Lynn's reflections from both reporting and living in Central and South America, along with his time spent with missioners in Africa and Asia. Only someone from his unique role at Maryknoll can share with us such a range of transformational experiences from lives and service of Maryknoll missioners in the field. We're also excited to share with you the details about his recent award-winning fiction novel, Pistaco, A Tale of Love in the Andes, which was deeply inspired by his time living in Peru and also received the 2018 Catholic Press Association First Place for Novels. We hope you enjoy this interview with Lynn Monahan.
Hi, Lynn. Thank you for being here with us today. We were just chatting about Lynn Monahan's experiences in Peru. So, Lynn, tell us how you found yourself in Peru.
I went to Peru in 1990 as a Maryknoll lay missioner. I had wanted to go to Peru. It was a place that had fascinated me. I'm a journalist by profession, and Maryknoll happened to support a publication called Latin America Press, which was in Lima. And it was a publication that, its perspective was in line with Maryknoll's vision of the world and the church, and it was ecumenical. There were some non-Catholics working there as well. But it covered it was an alternative view of what was going on in Latin America, and covered, human rights and indigenous issues and women's issues and things like that.
Now, in 1990-ish, you said, the Shining Path was...
They were on a roll.
They were on a roll, as we say.
They had started their urban campaign attacking Lima.
And for our listeners, explain exactly what they were about.
The Shining Path was a Maoist movement started by a man named Abimael Guzman up in Ayacucho. He was a university professor. He had spent some time in China, I believe. My memory serves me right. And he had this very Maoist view of communism. And he in 1980, he and his followers launched their armed revolution.
Against whom?
Against the Peruvian government.
Now, if I remember the stories in Maryknoll Magazine, though, they were also targeting the church, especially if it helped the poor.
Exactly. They and that is what is part of the book Pistaco. They did target the church, especially the church that Maryknoll is, which is raising consciousness of the indigenous people, helping people to improve their lives. Things like Caritas, bringing food and medicine.
Now, why would they attack that? Wouldn't they?
Because they felt that was a salve. Is that the right word? Salve.
Yeah.
To the wounds.
It takes away the revolutionary
spirit.
Spirit.
Yeah. I mean, the people. You're just. It's a Band-Aid. It's not getting to the underlying issue from their point.
Now, when we say attack the church, what exactly would they do?
Well, they would tell church people, and this happened to Maryknollers and others, get out. Or they would say, you can say Mass, but stop this, bringing in this food, stop this medical thing, stop this, rural education project. Sometimes the priests or nuns didn't do it, and they were targeted. Some of them were killed, When I was in language school in Cochabamba, there was an Australian sister who was killed in a village.
Basically for helping the poor.
Yeah, they were actually in that story. They were looking for the priest, and he was not there. And then they went to the nun, and they had one of these people's trial in the center of the town, and then they killed her. And it was really traumatic. Being in language school, planning to go to Peru, and being with a lot of priests and nuns studying language there at the same time, and quite a few people knew her. And she had studied at that school, at the Maryknoll Run language school in Cochabamba. So I remember that day so clearly. I mean, people were utterly in shock. They were just people wandering around just like, the Australians and the New Zealanders, they all knew her. The staff at the school knew her. And those of us who were going to Peru were like, what are we doing? So, and that was, that was, in some ways, that was also a beginning of the novel, because I never forgot that, and in the novel there is one of those people's trials that occurs. So.
And most of your book was inspired from your time as a Maryknoll missioner.
From my time in Peru, which included being a Maryknoll missioner. And a lot of it is many things that happen in the book are things that people told me. Some of the missioners told me. They would come back or come into the center house, Maryknoll's house that they had at the time there in Lima, and you'd sit there over dinner or something with them. They'd be telling you some of these things that were going on. The guys out in the mountains, but also the guys, working in the Pueblo Jóvenes will come in and have, some pretty amazing stories of what was going on, because there were attacks going on regularly. I mean, the building I worked in, the big stained glass windows broke and a bomb went off. There was a bomb that went off very close to our building, right across the street, across the highway, from a karate school that I used to go to.
When was the last time you were in Peru, and how has the situation changed from the ones you just described?
Last time I was in Peru was in 2012. The Shining Path is no longer an issue anymore. There's a lot of growth. At that time, we were still in a very, the economy here was still very sluggish, and Peru was really going very well. They hadn't gone through the kind of recession that we had gone through. Of course, not everything's good, because there's a lot of there's economic growth, but then it only affects certain sectors, and there's a very large indigenous population, a very large rural population. They don't always benefit from economic growth in the cities, but Lima's gotten a lot more crowded, much more traffic, more higher buildings, but it's safer because you can go do things that you couldn't do when I was there. In 2003, when I was starting to work on this book, I went to Lima with my wife and two daughters, and some friends of ours drove us up to Ayacucho, which Ayacucho was the cradle of the Shining Path. You could not drive that road when I was living there in the 90s. I mean, that would have been a suicide run, But we were, and it was not paved either. But then it was paved when we got there. And we drove up, and I went out. I had contacts there, and there was some people at an NGO, a nonprofit that worked out in the small villages, and they took me out to a village where, as they said to me, you could not have gone here during the time of the Shining Path. This would have been a red zone. You couldn't go. And I went to this village, and they were doing some of their workshops, in early childhood development, and workshops with agriculture, and doing stuff to help people produce better crops, better animal husbandry. And I went there so that I could find a setting for the part of the novel that occurs in the village. And I had been to villages, but I didn't have enough kind of like memory of one to really set it. And this was like perfect place for me to have gone to. And I spent the day there with these people, and I drew a lot of information from that to the setting of the book.
So, Lynn, your work with the magazine, you travel quite a bit obviously. So outside of your Peruvian experiences, has there been a country or an assignment or a story that, if you could pick one, I guess, that really impacted you, or one that you think back to and say, this is exactly the kind of work that I should be doing with my life?
Well, there's a lot of places I've gone with, reporting from Maryknoll, where I've just been blown away by the work they've been doing. One of those was going to Honduras in 2006, maybe, and seeing the work of Father Tom Geckler in Honduras. He later moved to Guatemala when Maryknoll pulled out of Honduras, but he was working with gang members in these, these shanty towns there, and horrific, situations, and Tom Geckler was fearless. We went to the funeral of a gang member who'd been killed by a rival gang, and it was tense. The one of the brothers of this dead young man, obviously also a gang member, just had a look of hatred on his face, and we prayed with these people, and it was family and children around, and then Father Geckler basically told them off, and he said, "You guys have made your choice, but my concern is these little ones who are here, who are be growing up and will be making these choices." And it was scary, because that guy was looking at Father Geckler like, if he'd have pulled out a gun and shot him, I would not have been surprised. And, we walked through the streets there, and he was saying, "Oh, yeah, they killed the son in this house. Oh, they killed so-and-so in this house. Oh, in this house, they killed 2 of the kids." And in this house, these 2 characters, the 2 sons joined rival gangs, and they're both dead now, It was amazing, and he'd been threatened 3 times.
God spared Father Geckler martyrdom. He died rather early in life, I think, of a heart attack, I believe.
I believe he died in his sleep one time. Yeah, he said he'd been threatened 3 times. He said all the people who threatened him are now dead. He said the moral is, don't threaten a priest. I said, what happened? He said, well, other gang members killed them. And he also credited a little bit that the gangs knew the work he did. They weren't really against him, because he really did do a lot for the people there. He didn't directly confront the gangs, in a sense, but he gave the young people there an alternative. He'd go to school, he'd help people build houses. He had a soup kitchen, a place where people could be fed.
He also helped them get rid of their gang tattoos?
He did that, as well as the other Father Labuda also was involved in that. I think that was more Father Labuda's work, but it was similar people. And it was very sad in that story, because there was a guy, his name was Henry, I believe, who was he was an ex-gang member. And he said that was very rare that you could get a gang member who was allowed to leave the gang. And this guy had tattoos on his face, all over. But this guy was so charismatic. I mean, you looked into his eyes, and something about his eyes just was like, it was warm and sparkly, and he was a friendly fella. And Father Geckler told us, well, they don't normally allow people to leave, but the gang kind of realized this guy had a real conversion. They believed he'd had a conversion, and they were kind of leaving him alone because he was working with the church. He was working with Father Geckler, and then I would say not even 6 months, maybe. Maybe it was a year, I don't know, after I had been there. We'd ran the story on Father Geckler. We had pictures of Henry, and Father Geckler called me up one day, and he said, they killed Henry. They had, there'd been, I think what he said, there had been a soccer match, and a lot of people had gone to this soccer match at a stadium, something, and a fight broke out between the 2 gang members, and Henry got out of there with his wife and children and his people. But the gang, his old gang, saw it as him running away and not helping them when they were in this fight, and they went into his house and shot him while he was in the shower. It was very traumatic for Tom. He really took it hard. Yeah.
Now, personally, you go to these places, whether you experienced them or saw them in Peru or as your role as the editor of Maryknoll Magazine, and you report on them and you read them. How do you stay positive? How do you keep from becoming discouraged?
Well, for one thing, I don't live there, and that's one reason. But also, to back up 1 second on this work that Father Geckler did is so relevant even now today. It's still going on in Guatemala. He moved to Guatemala, replicated that work there with some of the people from Honduras. But this is what the very situation is driving people to flee Central America, especially parents with their children, because, they're living in these villages or these inner city slums, shanty towns, and what they look out and says, if I stay here, my son is going to be recruited into the gang, or my daughter's going to end up being gang raped by these guys. Father Geckler told us that when he first got there, the gangs would celebrate different events by gang raping somebody. He managed to, at least where he was, to convince them to stop doing that. So, it's still, and it's really important. You see, the Maryknoll's been doing this kind of work for that long, that is still the root of this border crisis we have today.
A lot of our listeners may not even realize that I think right now it's Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador.
They're the main ones, yeah.
The main ones where the people are fleeing, and these were the ones back in the 80s, etc., where the U.S. was enormously involved in supporting one side or the other with guns and God knows what. And so in El Salvador, let's say, for example, so there's a peace treaty and there's a ceasefire, and the guns are there. And suddenly the soldiers don't have really a job because there's supposedly no war, and the rebels have no place to go, but they all have guns. And that's
one of the root causes. The other root cause was that, during the 90s, under the Clinton administration, Clinton, deported gang members,
From here back to there.
Yeah, and thinking was obviously not intending to export the gangs. These gangs started here in Los Angeles and stuff. They, he was doing a little bit like President Trump was doing. Like, these guys are bad characters, get them out. So they were shipped back home. Well, what they do, they opened up a local business. They started their gang. So, we took flack for having that in the magazine one time, but it's the reality. It's not blaming the U.S. It was, President Clinton's effort to deal with this. These people are criminals, and we don't want them here. Send them home. But then sending them home, we inadvertently seeded these U.S. based gangs into Central America. And now the fallout from that is now these people fleeing these gangs. Now, to get back to your question about how do I cope with this, one of the things, I had been a Maryknoll missioner, so I had been exposed to the reality of mission, the reality of Peru, which was, really stark, really shocking. It really cost me a lot emotionally to adapt when I went there in 1990, and it was violent. It was scary. There were soldiers with, these AK-47s on the buses. The newspapers were filled with pictures of people being, assassinated in the markets. It was frightening, and there were bombs going off in different parts of the city. And I remember becoming extremely depressed. I'd had experience with depression earlier in my adulthood, and I knew what depression was. And I remember, and then also Lima doesn't get any sunlight for half the year. It's fogged in. Literally, it does not get sun from sort of the end of May, beginning of June, up until September or something. It's this sea mist closes in, and really the effects of lack of sunlight on. I remember walking down the street, and something just hit me. I said, "I'm not here. I'm how many years earlier, back where I was at one point earlier in my life when I went through a depression, and I worked through that, and I said, this is where I am." So to kind of wake up and say, "No, I'm here," and I did eventually get out of that. I went to there was a Jesuit counselor who kind of spiritual director, counselor, and he helped me to kind of adapt a little bit and just accustom myself, got used to it, get used to seeing the poverty's pretty bleak. I mean, it's tough. So part of that is having lived there. I've seen that. It's not like somebody going here on an immersion trip or something. That's one of the things that Maryknoll deals with and other groups deal with when they bring people to the developing world, and you see that poverty. For some people, this is just like, it's hard. It's really hard to cope with. And my kids, when we were younger, my oldest daughter was born there. My youngest daughter was born here, but we've gone back, and they had a hard time sometimes with people begging. One time we came out of a restaurant, and a little woman, little campesina woman, with a big skirt and the braids and coming up. And, I don't usually give money to people begging on the street, but I did give her some money. And my daughter says, "Why did you give her money?" And I said, because she's an old woman, and there's not much of a system here to take care of her. It's not like she's somebody who you could say, find some work. They had the same problem. I took my family with me on one trip when I went to Africa, 2007. My daughters were my one daughter was in 3rd grade, the other was in, I don't know where, I can't remember now, 3 years older, so she was in 6th grade, I guess. And we went to Kibera, where a lay missioner was working.
What country?
It was in Nairobi.
Mm-hmm.
Went to the huge slum of Kibera in Nairobi, one of the biggest slums in Africa. And there was a school that this lay missioner was working at, a parish that Maryknoll has worked in various times. And we went to the school, went to the 3rd grade. My youngest daughter was a hit. All these young kids kind of wanted to touch her hair and stuff. And she was a shy girl, but for some reason, she really became at ease with these children. We had some beautiful photos from that. But I remember one day we were walking down downtown Nairobi, my wife and I and my 2 daughters, and we just wanted to do some shopping, before we leave home. And these kids were following us, begging. And I was not going to give them money because it's not a good thing. Because parents will push their kids to beg, and you don't want to promote that. But they were following us, and my kids had a real hard time. Dad, why don't you give them money? They were really upset with me. And then we went by an ice cream shop, and there were a couple, a white couple, tall white couple, come out with ice cream. And that little band of kids that was following us all of a sudden did, a detour, and we're behind them. And it was but it's hard to explain to kids, that. But my daughters are aware of the reality. And so that idea of how do you cope with it, for me, the Maryknoll missioners and some of these other people you meet out there in these different groups that Maryknoll works with, these people are living saints. They just see people who do things that blow me away time and time again. When first trip I did with Maryknoll as a staffer of the magazine was go to Thailand. And Father Mike Bassano was working in an AIDS, sort of like a hospice. It was in a Buddhist a monastery, Wat, and they and it was really the antiretrovirals were coming in, but it wasn't as available completely, and so there were people who were very sick. And in those early days, it was very tenuous sometimes, the medicine, and if you got sick with TB, then you had to get off the medicine, try to cure the TB, and then you had to get on a different medicine. And so it was really dodgy. Sometimes people get the medicine, but then they didn't survive anyway. And so this was almost, it was a hospice in many ways. And to see Father Bassano changing diapers of people, I was just amazed, that there's this priest, from the States doing this work. I said, this is like Mother Teresa. And I've seen this time and time again. Maryknoll fathers and sisters and brothers just doing work that is just what keeps them going? They're living there for years and years and years. I just was in Africa. I was up in Uganda where Father John Barth is working in a refugee camp. we had the story in the July-August issue where these people are refugees from South Sudan. They fled after their town was attacked because the rebels in the civil war in Sudan had set up their base about 20 kilometers from the town. So the military, the other side, which is the government, was unhappy, and this town was caught in the middle between these two groups. And the rebels would come in and say, don't help the military, and they'd come in and they'd take food. So, or the military would come in and do the same. Don't help the rebels, or you're rebels. And and these guys were trying to just get along, and then one day they just the military launched like a 3-prong offensive, one against the rebel base, and then 2 prongs against the town, and thousands of people fled. Some of them were killed, and they fled on foot for 2-3 days to get to the border of Uganda. And then the UN already knew they were coming. I think the UN probably had intelligence that there was going to be this attack. The villagers knew, the townspeople knew the attack was coming because they could see the buildup, and they told me, I had these amazing interviews with people. They basically had, the community organizers said, okay, if you start hearing shooting, go. Just go. Just run. And that's literally what they did. And it was just, what's really amazing was the faith of these people. Some of these people I interviewed, they've been refugees 3 times in their life. That was what the title of the story was, 3 times a refugee. And yet, they're smiling. You're having a normal conversation with them. They've, and of course we do a lot of the Catholics is that, their faith really helps sustain them. And then, of course, people like John Barth, the other priest, the Salesian priest that he works with there, they help a lot. They come in and try to first of all, the sacramental ministry, they're doing masses and stuff, but they're also helping to feed them, they try to give them what they can't get from the UN. And they're setting up schools. Father Barth is working with set up these nursery schools and stuff like that. They set up, Maryknoll's funded these multi-purpose buildings which serve as churches, but also places for learning and meetings and stuff like that. So it's inspiring. It really is inspiring to see these people who dedicated their lives to helping people at such a fundamental level,
I was going to ask you, but I think you just answered the question, is how do you see the role of Maryknoll Magazine today and your role as editor? But
to tell those stories, to tell those stories of what Maryknollers are doing, but also those other stories addressing issues that are just really important. The immigration issue right now, the refugee issue right now. It's a serious question. It's not a good situation any way you look at it. But we have to tell that story, and we've been telling that story a lot for the last 2 years. I was just reading a story by one of our staff people about the family separation that's going on, and the work that Maryknoll's doing there with some other people on the border, trying to just, listen to these people's story, help them get heard. I think many people in the U.S., they feel overwhelmed by this tide of people coming across the border, and you have to be sensitive a little bit to that. Not everybody has the same perspective. Those who have been overseas a lot, who have seen this mission work, they just don't understand what is this wave of people and how do we tell them. And it's not just Maryknoll; it's in the commercial press and the mainstream media too. It's like these people are coming. They're fleeing for their lives. They're fleeing for the lives of their children, and we need a response to that is humane, that doesn't vilify them. Yeah, it's a serious problem. Yeah, it creates problems here, but you got to respond to it. We're called to respond to it, as Christians, as Catholics, but as Americans, we're called to respond to it. This has been our story. It's the story of our whole founding of a nation. We celebrate Thanksgiving. You could say those were the first illegal immigrants. They showed up here as refugees seeking religious freedom, and they weren't invited.
Well, the lesson there is it didn't turn out well for the Native Americans either.
Yeah,
maybe they should have been stricter in their.
But they were welcomed. The initial group where we celebrate Thanksgiving. It's always that that the feast that they celebrated with the Native Americans. But our history is a history of migration, and the history of the world is a history of migration. That's the main story in the Bible. In our history, you're always talking about the movement of people. People are always moving. That's life.
Right.
There's no permanence, and we're seeing it on our border right now, and we really do need to respond to it. We also need leadership that is going to say, yeah, we have a problem right now on the border, and we got to deal with that. We also, as a nation, as the biggest nation in the most powerful nation in the Americas and in the world, one of the most powerful nations in the world, we're a leader. We have to deal with the root causes of these that's driving these people away, and you're not hearing that from anybody. People are fleeing. Well, why? Why are they fleeing? And that's the thing about Maryknoll. Maryknoll always go someplace and they ask why, not just what. I'll feed the poor, but the question, why are they poor? Get to the root cause, and
not just tell me what to do.
Right, and Maryknoll, that's always been Maryknoll's focus. Why is this problem here? How do we solve the systemic problem? And as a nation, we have to take that same attitude, and we have in the past. I think John Kennedy, with the Peace Corps and the Alliance for Progress and things like that, looking at how do we help our neighbors? They're our neighbors. If your neighbor's house is on fire or he's got a home invasion, you're going to help them, receive them. Well,
especially if you're the one that set their house on fire. That's a whole other story.
Well, that's another issue. But that's how I would tend to look at it. You help. People say America first. Yeah, okay, I understand that. But you help your neighbor. We do want to help our neighbors, but our neighbors are also the countries to the south of us. They are our neighbors, and we need to show that leadership. How do we solve those problems? And that's where Maryknoll's done that, always done that, going into places and looking at root causes of things. And I think as a nation, we need to go back because we're not going to solve this problem. As long as people are afraid for their lives in these countries. Right now, the focus is Central America. It's not the only area that people are leaving, but we have to at some point start saying, what can we do? What can we do to help? And I don't hear anything. Maybe I'm missing it. I haven't heard anything from anyone other than the church and people like Maryknoll who do that. So can we talk a little bit more about my
book? I was just going to say, don't forget, you have to tell them first tell our readers how they can get your book.
Yeah, the book is called Pistaco, A Tale of Love in the Andes. It's the story of an American priest from Connecticut, and I'm from Connecticut, so I sort of took somebody from there and made up a person, who goes to Peru in the mid-1980s. He wants to do mission, but he's also sort of fleeing some unresolved issues that he has around intimacy, and he's leaving a little bit because he was attracted to a young parishioner and where he was working, and to stay true to his calling as a priest. I'm getting out of here, and he goes on mission, in a sense, and he lands into the middle of Peru where the Shining Path has gone crazy, and he's told when he's going to go to mission, he said, yeah, it's not so bad. They're out in the mountains, Lima's safe. It's like New York, and that's what I was told when I went to Peru. It's no more dangerous than New York City, So I said, okay, and the reality it wasn't. It was a lot more dangerous than New York City. At least then, you weren't having bombing attacks in New York City, and before this is in 1999. Yeah, and But so he lands there and finds that this isn't. First of all, he's stunned by the poverty, which he hasn't ever experienced before. And I drew on my experiences to describe his experiences when I got there. And I can remember Father Ray Finch, the Society's Superior General, drove me out to Villa El Salvador. One of the first days I had first gotten to Lima, and we came over the crest of this hill, and I used that in the book. And spreading out before me in the desert was Villa El Salvador. And I was just like, oh my God. There's this massive spread of shanty town shacks. And I remember, and I had to put this in the book and the editors cut it out, but, it was like, my thought was, I'm seeing a vision of either the end of civilization or the beginning. I don't know, what is this? It's almost like, I thought this must be like what life was, in the Middle Ages when these cities began to coalesce, That or its post-apocalyptic world. I was just stunned, and that some of that I used the book to tell the story of what it was like to see Lima. What were some of the things going on there, and in the story, the priest wants to really go out into the countryside. He's kind of not all that comfortable in the urban setting, and he wants to go where there are more indigenous. There's plenty of indigenous in Lima, but he wants to be in a village, and he opts to do that. And then in the village that he ministers to, and doesn't really live there, but he goes out to it all the time. He's the only outsider other than a school teacher who's from Lima, a young woman Peruvian school teacher, and they're drawn together in the midst of this little crossfire between the shining path, which is there, and the military, which is there, and these people in this village are, as was the reality, caught between these two. If you're not telling us, where these rebels are, you are one, and the rebels are if you help the military, So, and that was kind of the setting for the novel, and sort of wanted to talk about a lot of that reality there. And I also wanted to tell the story of that school teacher, who was loosely based on somebody I knew who had gone to a village like that, a village where she didn't speak Quechua but wanted to be in this village and took a job where, as she once told me, I had to learn Quechua because either to do that than teach all my kids Spanish, and I thought it was a fascinating story. And so I kind of wanted to tell her story too, and I wanted to deal with some of the issues that fascinate me. The question of syncretism, how the indigenous beliefs of Peru are kind of incorporated into Catholicism, and how they practice simultaneously. And I'd heard of this before. I'd once written a story as a reporter in the States on Native Americans, and I remember one of the Native Americans I spoke to talked to me about how he grew up in the Seattle area, and the Native Americans there, and he talked about how they were Catholic, but they also practiced a lot of their traditional beliefs. And I said, well, isn't there some kind of contradiction there? And his response was, not for us.
Clearly you've never been to Italy.
Well, so I was fascinated by that too. How do you
combine?
Yeah, and there's two strains of mission, and one is that you eradicate that paganism, as it used to be called, and the other is that you embrace it. Coming out of Vatican II, you find what is holy there. The idea that God's already there. We're not bringing God to the people. We're finding God among the people, and how are they expressing their belief in the divine. And you find tremendous overlap. I was just in Africa, and I did this course that is run by a Maryknoller on African reality. And one of the things that they talked about in detail there is how the African belief system had a lot of parallels with Christianity, which made the traditional African people very open to Christianity in many cases, because you start breaking it down. There are really many of the African people are monotheistic, but we don't understand it because they have these other expressions. Just as in the Andes, they're monotheistic, but they have these spirits. They believe in spirits, or who are maybe occupying a mountain is a spirit. But it isn't saying there's no one God, but this is a different expression. We have the devil, we have angels, we have spirits, so it's just fascinating. I find that really fascinating that you can find these parallels, and where kind of you get down to the more the core of spirituality, not religion. What is our practice? How do we practice? We go to Mass Sunday. How do other religions? They go to temple or they go to the Buddhist monastery. People have different ways of expressing, but there's a level you get to where you're really talking about spirit, about our souls and how we connect with God.
So the book has recently won an important award and has some recognition. You were talking about at the beginning of the show. I wonder if you could share a little bit about that.
Well, the Catholic Press Association of the U.S. and Canada, they have an annual conference, and this year, and they have awards for journalism, and Maryknoll often wins a lot of awards. For the magazine wins, and the Spanish magazine wins, Misioneros, and Orbis Book wins lots of awards. And there's a novel category, and my book, which was published by In Extenso Press, which is out of Pennsylvania, and it's imprint of Acta Publications out of Chicago. They submitted it for an award in the novel category, and it won first place.
Wonderful,
which was really a nice recognition. It's gotten some recognition. It was finalist in the Indies Award, which is an award given to small and independent publishing houses, and there was a nice blurb in Publishers Weekly, which called it. They had an article last year about religious themed fiction, and it called Pistaco, quote, a more literary offering, end quote, that, quote, illuminates tensions between Catholicism and indigenous religion, power and justice, and celibacy and intimacy. So it was nice to get those plugs.
And how do we get the book?
Certainly you can go on Amazon and get it. You can get the hardcover, paperback, or ebook. The publisher, In Extenso Press, you can find their website easily.
We'll put the link in the show notes.
Oh, that'd be great. Or Acta Publication, which is the parent company and sort of the distributor. You can get it from them, or if you go to the bookstore, your local bookstore, if you still have one, and ask for it, they can order it. They can get
Excellent.
The book. So, I'm very pleased with the award. It was really nice to get that recognition, and I've gotten very good responses from it. And what's really been impressive for me, I was very nervous when this book was coming out because I wasn't sure what the response would be from Maryknollers. Now, I don't mention Maryknoll in the book. In fact, the priest goes there. He's a diocesan priest who does, wants to do a stint of mission, which Maryknoll helps diocesan priests do that with the program they have. So I was concerned that, people might jump all over me, but I've gotten great responses. And from priests who worked years in Peru and have really loved the book. Father Pete Byrne, who recently passed away last fall, he read the book. The former editor of Maryknoll Magazine loved the book, and he gave Father Byrne a copy. And Father Byrne then bought 3 more copies to send down to Peru. And it's been really affirming to get positive feedback from missioners who lived in Peru, as well as some Peruvians themselves, because I really feared getting something really wrong. Me as a layperson writing about a priest and then trying to deal with the question of intimacy, and I don't know that, but what I did to myself, excuse the expression, but, the priest puts his pants on one leg at a time, just as me. So I figured, I thought, well, if I were a priest, what issues would I be dealing with? And I know I would. The reason I never became a priest was that question of celibacy was not one I think I could resolve. At one point when I was going to be going to lay missioners, I started wondering, am I being called to the priesthood? I hadn't had a serious relationship in a while and stuff, and I was thinking, I was really much more into spirituality and this whole feeling I'm called to go with Maryknoll, and I thought maybe I'm being called to the priesthood. And the idea was not one that I welcomed, and it was really bothering me a lot. It was on my mind. And then one day I remember walking around my apartment. It was in Waterbury, Connecticut, where I was working as a reporter, and I just stopped and I said, okay, God, I can't deal with this. I personally don't think that I'm a good candidate for the priesthood. I think church has got enough problems. It doesn't need me, And I don't think I can handle, that role of a priest, where I know that, many women are attracted to their pastor. They look up to the pastor. It's one of the issues sometimes that people deal with. And I said, I don't think that temptation is a good one to put on me. But I can't handle this. It's in your hands. I'm turning it over to you. And I don't usually do that, but I literally was talking to God, wandering around my apartment, and said, it's in your hands. If this is the path you want me on, you take me. But I'm sure you know what you're doing. And God basically said, you're right. And I stopped thinking about it.
And is that how you were led to the lay missioners?
Well, I was already on the path to joining the lay missioners,
Okay.
and that was kind of why I was thinking that. But I didn't know that from joining the lay missioners, I would beginning a career with Maryknoll. I thought it was a short-term, I did 3 years as a lay missioner. I worked with the Associated Press in Lima, came to the States. I worked for Bloomberg News in Manhattan on their Latin America desk. And then I left in 2003 because I wasn't really into financial journalism. And I felt like I had gone from being a Maryknoll lay missioner, where Maryknoll's calling is a preferential option for the poor, liberation theology, and I said I'm working for I'm working for people who are Wall Street. And one of the turning points was when one of the editors there had gone on a big staff meeting, and he went on a rant, and he said, we are working for the wealthiest and smartest people in the world. And in that thinking there in Manhattan, in the financial world, those two were synonymous. If you were wealthy, you were smart. If you were smart, you were wealthy, because those go hand in hand, right? And I remember thinking, no, wait, how did I get from a preferential option for the poor to this option, which is not mine? And I ended up quitting. And in the year after that, I took a year off, and I wrote the book.
Well, thank you, Lynn.
Thank you for having me.
I learned more about you in this past hour than I had known for all these years. Thanks a lot.
We've known each other a long time.
Yeah. You've been listening to the Maryknoll Podcast, Among the People. To learn more about the work of Maryknoll around the world, visit our website, maryknollsociety.org. Or if you'd like to subscribe to our English or Spanish magazines, visit maryknollmagazine.org. We'd really like to hear what you have to say about this episode, so please leave your reviews, comments, or questions below. And feel free to share this podcast with friends or anyone you feel may be interested. This has been Maryknoll Father Joe Veneroso, along with co-host Megan Fleming, for Among the People. Till next time.